Thank you. Welcome to tonight's annual license committee meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live on Council's YouTube channel. My name is Councillor Mercy Ume, and I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. Now we move to item 1 on the agenda. Item 1, election of vice chair. I propose Councillor Patrick Welsh.
Second.
Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 2, apologies for absence.
Chair, apologies have been received from Councillor Zara Quayam, Councillor Genevieve Nagobi, Councillor Bora Kwan, Councillor Jose Afonso, Councillor Alia Afghal Khan, and Councillor Dominic Stanton.
Thank you. Item 3, roll call and declaration of interests. I will now do a roll call to confirm the members in attendance. When called, please say present, note any declaration of interest. Councillor Paul Alexandra. Councillor Florence Chevede.
Present.
Councillor Wesley Hackett.
Present.
Councillor Asif Sadek.
Present.
Councillor Patrick Welsh.
Present, no declarations of interest.
Thank you. Item 4, open minutes of the meeting held on 12th June 2023. Are there any comments on open minutes? Are the minutes agreed? Does anyone disagree?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 5, annual license committee report, April 2023 to March 2024. This report provides a summary update of the work and performance of the licensing team for the period between 1st April 2023 and 31st March 2024. Appendices 2 and 3 of this report are exempted and will require the committee to pass the proposed resolution at the end of the agenda to exclude members of the public and press from the proceedings of that discussion. Lorna, the officer, please introduce this report.
Oh, actually, Chair, it's going to be me introducing it this evening. No problem. I think we've got some slides to show you, first of all. Just while we're getting those up. Yeah, I appreciate, obviously, it's at the end of the working day for everyone this evening. We do have quite a lot of information to go through. There is the annual report itself for 23-24, which is quite historic now. There's also some other matters that we did want to discuss with you as well. The nighttime strategy, for example, and I know many of you would have heard about that previously, but I'd like to just touch upon that briefly. And then the gambling policy renewal as well, because there's some points about that I'd like to go through and get your thoughts on as well. Maybe we should just do some introductions first of all, just to check you know everyone. I'm Adrian Overton, I'm the licensing team manager. If I go on to you, Lorna.
I'm Lorna McKenna, the licensing compliance officer.
Hi, I'm Emmanuel Amponso. I'm council solicitor.
Brilliant. Thank you. If we can move on to the next slide. Thanks, Lorna. So just to give you a bit of an overview, first of all, of the report itself, and I know you should all have a copy of it, and if you don't, obviously, let me know and we can make sure that we get you that copy. It goes through a staffing update initially, then we've got the licensing team performance and work activity for 23-24. There's then a financial update on income and debt for the team. And then there's information on the licensing committees, the subcommittees for last year. And Lorna's going to be helping us out with a few slides on that, going through the numbers of committees and any committees that had to be adjourned and the reasons for those as well. There's then an enforcement update for the last financial year and a general overview of the type of enforcement that we undertake. And then we're going to speak briefly about the licensing policies in effect. And as mentioned earlier, we are in the process of renewing our gambling policy at the moment. So I'll spend a bit of time just talking about that. And then I'll also talk about the nighttime strategy that we're in the final stages of introducing at the moment as well. And then we've got current and concluded appeals for 23-24 and complex cases. And that will be something that we will have to adjourn into a private session to discuss those points. So maybe it's helpful just first of all, just a reminder of the activities that we regulate in the licensing team. So it's the sale and supply of alcohol, regulated entertainment. So that's live music, recorded music, plays, films, etc. Just to note that background recorded music is not licensable. So that's the type of thing that you might get in a lift or a supermarket, for example. And then late night refreshment. So that's the sale of hot food and drinks after 11 o'clock in the evening and up until 5 o'clock in the morning. Gambling premises. So that's such as betting shops, adult gaming centres, track betting licenses. So just that you're aware, track betting licenses are primarily the kind of kiosks, etc., that you would get in football matches, and people would use those whilst football matches are taking place as well. We don't have many of them, and they are all linked to football grounds as well. And then sex establishments, so that's sex shops and lap dancing clubs. We've only got one in the borough now. We did have a sex shop in Hammersmith Road, which has recently closed. So we've just got Secrets on Glenthorne Road. And then finally, scrap metal dealers and collectors. So the sites for these venues are mainly in the north of the borough, where it's more industrial. We do sometimes have issues with metal theft associated with these venues. So we do need to make sure that we carry out regular inspections at those venues. So just moving on to planning, as mentioned at the last committee, the licensing service has now moved from regulatory services and now sits within the planning service. And this had I think it just taken place, yes, when the last annual committee took place. And I thought it might just help just to give an update on what's happened since we moved into the planning service. And as you can see from the previous structure included on the right-hand side of the slide, we have previously included the market service. We don't now have that in the team. And the rationale behind the move was to try and help increase economic activity in Hammersmith and Fulham. So that was to allow the licensing and planning services to share best practice, for example, and to work more closely on new applications and developments. The move also helped to ensure that licensing is viewed more through an economic lens rather than a purely regulatory one. And I think that's definitely happened. I think it's fair to say the new system has been working very well, and the licensing team is now much more in tune with planning considerations. So just as an example, that planning colleagues now regularly come along to our licensing enforcement group meetings that take place every other Wednesday, where new applications and enforcement actions are discussed. So we discuss any enforcement actions, and we make sure we're joined up with planning colleagues and that we're all on the same page now. So I definitely think that's helping. Thanks, Simon. So just in terms of a staffing update, so just very brief. So Karen Layig, who many of you knew from licensing committees previously, has now started a new career abroad, and Christina Perez, who was one of our enforcement officers, has now stepped into that position as of about 2 months now. So as Christina's moved on, we are recruiting for another licensing enforcement officer, and that recruitment is currently underway at the moment. And then Sophia Barrett, just making sure we're promoting people within the team, as we always do, has now moved into a new role as an enforcement officer, which has then left a vacancy in the administration team. And we've welcomed Abdul Allah from outside the council as a new licensing compliance assistant. And I'll pass over to you, Lorna. Thank you.
So just moving on to the performance and work activity of the licensing team for the last year, we have seen an overall increase of 6% in applications from the previous year. So just sort of looking at the applications as a breakdown, new premises licenses and full variations were similar to the year before. One of the biggest differences we've had in the last year is the 18 provisional statements which were received for the redevelopment work of Olympia, which is compared to 0 the year before. We've had an increase in personal licenses, transfers and minor variation, and we've seen a decrease in the DPS variations and an increase in the temporary event notices. So the workload is increasing within the team. The applications are coming in and a variation as well. Just moving on to work activity to do with the Gambling Act. We've got one less adult gaming centre within the borough compared to the previous year. And other than that, we have had no changes in betting shops, track application or bingo premises licence within the year for 2023-2024. I know Adrian's going to touch a lot more on the new gambling policy that's going to be coming in.
I think just on that, Lorna, I think that's worth just making that point as well, that the number of gambling premises is reducing. I know there is some concern with the number of those types of premises in the borough, and whilst we are going to introduce that restrictive gambling policy, we are seeing a trend, I think, across the country as well, with gambling activities going online as well. So that's sort of what the picture that we're getting in the borough as well.
Moving on to my favourite topic, licensing subcommittees. So we have seen an increase in the number of hearings being organised compared to the previous year, with a 7% increase. It's also just worth noting, because we've had a very busy year in the 2024-2025 period so far. None of these figures include any of the provisional statements that were heard for, or the applications heard for the Olympia redevelopment, so they will be in next year's figures. So in the cases that were heard in the subcommittees in the last year, 55% of the cases were granted in full or in part. We've had some refused and then some that are disposed and adjourned for different reasons, sometimes supplementary agenda, sometimes by the applicants is various reasons, or sometimes we've reached an agreement. I think it is also worth noting in these figures what sometimes these cases that we'll get representations, but what we're trying to really focus on is mediation and finding a solution to reduce the number of committees. So those ones that we mediate on are not reflected in these figures, and it's something that's becoming more proactive as we try and engage the residents and applicants to find solutions as well. And then just sort of the next one is the financial update on the income and debt for licensing. So the income generated in the last year has been increased by £42,994. So there's been quite a significant increase. And one thing that obviously you might be aware of with the Licensing Act, the fees are set by the central government, so it's not something we can amend. So we don't have any influence on that. So the fees are set. And as of March 2024, the total overdue licensing debt was £9,885 compared to the £16,675 from the 31st of March of the previous year. The licensing admin team are very proactive with sending out the notices of annual fees, and it's something that's really we're getting on top of. So as you can see, there's been an increase in suspension notices that had been sent from the previous year, and there's just been a more proactive approach in general. And then the final thing for me is the pre-application advice service that the licensing team offer. As it says on the slide, that we offer this. It's a really good, excellent value for money for applicants to just speak to the licensing team, get advice of what can be applied for, maybe speak with the police and other responsible authorities to ensure that obviously the quality of applications is coming through. And we do offer for pre-application advice for small independent businesses to help obviously support the growth of businesses within the borough. And although the number of applications for pre-application advice did reduce in the last year, we have seen an increase in revenue from this due to a lot of larger applications coming in with like the Olympia redevelopment and things like that.
Thanks, Lorna. So just in terms of service improvements, in terms of what we've achieved and what we've got planned, we are in the very final stages of introducing a nighttime strategy, so I hesitantly put that down there as achieved, but I will talk a bit more about that in some of the next slides. In terms of Martin's Law, we've now introduced, and for those of you who don't know, Martin's Law is new terrorism legislation in the wake of the Manchester Arena bombing in May 2017 that was introduced. So we've now got a number of conditions that we would expect to be added to any large venue, any large entertainment venue, and these essentially require counter-terrorism training takes place and is implemented at those premises. That's not the law at the moment, but we've taken that step ahead of it actually being introduced. So I've been working with many of our large venues, including the Apollo and others, and they've all been very receptive to our ideas, and we're very on board with that, which was obviously very encouraging. In terms of Ask for Angela and Wave advice visits, we carried out these in December 2023, and we did a number of test purchases across the borough. So this involved entering licensed premises over the course of a day, early evening, offering advice and guidance to each one of the licensed premises, just in terms of Ask for Angela and drink spiking. And then information was also provided on more broadly on welfare and vulnerability training and drink spiking as well. So I think it's worth mentioning that we had an audit in the early part of this year as well. There were a couple of recommendations that we had to work on, and there's some that we're still working on at the moment. The vast majority were of the recommendations we actioned, and they were implemented immediately. One of those recommendations was just about the number of enforcement visits and the number of high-risk inspections that we were undertaking, and we're going to rectify that issue by increasing our number of enforcement visits once we get our new enforcement officer on board. Unfortunately, we've gone through a period of time where one enforcement officer's left, and then we've had to get another enforcement officer. So there's only been a limited amount of time where we've actually had two officers working alongside each other, which is just a bit unfortunate, really. And then also increased partnership working with agencies such as immigration. So we've carried out a number of joint visits with the immigration team, and that's resulted in workers from licensed premises being investigated by by immigration officers. And on one occasion that led to a review by the immigration team as well. And then just internally, we started a process to a new case management system, a new NEC system from our uniform system that we've used previously, that's taking up quite a lot of officer time. So that's underway. So just in terms of what's planned for the next year, a new gambling policy. Again, I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. That's going to be more restrictive. We want to focus, once we've got our new gambling policy in place, we want to focus on some more gambling visits, and then really look at the preventative measures for problem gamblers as well, and look at the vulnerability element of gambling as well. We really want to have a particular focus on that. And then a new sex establishment policy. You may have noticed this has been on our agenda for a couple of years actually, and we really want to focus on the people within the industry and make sure that they're getting all the advice and guidance that they need in terms of if they did want to leave the sex industry. I think previously when we produced our policy, we were really concerned about nuisance and antisocial behaviour that came about as a result of those types of venues. And now we're obviously really thinking about the individuals in those venues. And then finally, we want to introduce some new fees for our film rating service as well. Thanks, Laura. So yeah, just talking about the nighttime strategy, just to give you some background, this was, we were asked by the leader and Councillor KM at the end of last year to urgently develop a nighttime strategy. The idea behind it really, one of the three sort of focus points was to create a special focus on our three town centres, trying to set out a unique vision for each one of the very different areas. We also wanted to increase footfall in the Riverside area of the borough, especially in the winter months. We were aware, and some of the information that we collected, that those areas can be seen as unsafe and are potentially unsafe in those months when there's poor lighting and in the winter months. We also wanted to maintain a focus on our three football clubs and our larger venues. Obviously, they attract thousands of visitors most weeks, and we wanted to get a better understanding how we could try and retain some of those people on the borough as well. So in terms of progress so far with our strategy, we've had online workshops with the Nighttime Economy Working Group. There's been desk-based research. We've had to make sure that obviously we're coordinating existing policies and strategies within planning teams and other teams, and making sure that any strategy that we introduce isn't contrary to those existing policies and plans. There's been dedicated night tours with invited stakeholders. And we've also had night audits in Hammersmith, Fulham and the Shepherd's Bush town centres. So we're nearly there. Oh, sorry. We still need to have a workshop for each town centre, and we're just pending some dates for those final workshops. We also need to launch an online survey with residents, workers and businesses, and then we'll be in the position where we can actually publish our final strategy. So we're hoping that we'll be able to do that in the next couple of weeks anyway. So just in terms of the emerging findings, I thought it might be helpful just to share these with you. Some of them are quite obvious. I think, you know, if you know the borough, you'll know straight away that you know that there's certain issues in certain areas. But in Fulham, it's our consultants who we employed found that many of the large hospitality venues have now left the town centre, meaning that there's actually quite a limited nighttime offer in Fulham at the moment. They said that the town centre lacks an identity at the moment, and it doesn't cater for the residents in the area, some of whom are very affluent. There's a heavy reliance from the football trade, which is keeping businesses afloat at the moment. And many of the businesses have actually said that they wouldn't survive if the club left the area. So obviously they definitely need to diversify to make sure they're not just solely reliant on the football club. In terms of positives, there's good lighting, there's good transport away from the borough, especially when football matches end, and there's other independent businesses like Vagabond Wines, El Santo that are really good examples of an independent business. In terms of Hammersmith, the weaknesses were seen as the traffic in the area that creates a very hostile environment, especially around the one-way system. It was advised that Lyric Square is a very attractive asset to the town centre during the day, but it was noted that it has been seen to be misused later in the evening with drunken people seen using the square. The Riverside area they identified is very disconnected from the town centre. There was a possible suggestion of lighting or festoon lighting or lighting on the floor, leading people down to the river so that they can understand that that's there. It has been said that there's lots of people who were spoken to didn't know that all of the pubs and restaurants were down by the river when they're in the town centre. So there's not the wayfinding is basically very poor. So just in terms of positive points, I'm not sure if you're aware of a TfL rating, a PTAL rating. So Hammersmith in particular has the highest PTAL rating of 6B. It was noted that this could also be a weakness as well. People come out of the Apollo, for example, thousands of people, and they're literally 100 metres away or so from getting on the Piccadilly line. And there's really no other option from them to go straight from the Apollo onto the tube network. Whereas if you have for example, the Brixton Academy, when you come off the tube, you walk down the high street and you've got an opportunity to use independent businesses or to stay in the area for a bit longer. So that can cause issues as well. And then one of the other positives is obviously the development of the civic campus that they thought would be a real draw to the borough when it opens. So just in terms of Shepherd's Bush, very male orientated later in the evening, a threatening atmosphere, especially on the north side of Shepherd's Bush Green. It was identified there's too many of the same type of premises in that area, lots of off licenses, late night refreshment venues, and it appeared that due to the perception of safety, many people were looking to eat or spend time in the safety of the Westfield complex, and a lot of people were leaving directly from the Westfield and going home. They weren't actually then, permeating out into other, and using other independent businesses around Shepherd's Bush. It was noted that some venues appear to be successfully attracting people after work, such as the Hawk's Nest and the Bush Theatre. So they were seen as good examples. And then also just the very good sort of cultural element of Shepherd's Bush, obviously with the Bush Hall and Bush Theatre, the Empire. And then it was identified the new residential units that are being built there as well. And again, the very high transport rating, I think it was 6B again in Shepherd's Bush, was said to be very good. Thanks, Lorna. So just moving on to the gambling policy. You can see from the timeline to the right, there's a very tight timeline on this, and that's primarily because of the development of a new evidence base for the policy. And we had a first draft of the evidence base. We took some legal advice on that draft. And we were told that we needed to develop the causal link between the issues that we were identifying in the area and the number of gambling premises. So we're busy developing that with our colleagues in the BI team at the moment to try and get more information. So the evidence base for the policy is known as a local area profile. And what we want is this to provide different layers of information. So we want data on crime and antisocial behaviour. We want information on deprivation, the location of gambling support and addiction centres. And then we're going to see if we can find that link between those issues and between the gambling premises. What we found initially is that there are clusters of gambling premises in areas where there's high crime and antisocial behaviour. And we're currently trying to find if there's other issues in those areas as well. And what the idea is at the moment from our initial review of the data is that we want to create cumulative impact areas or saturation zones. We're not quite sure what they're going to be called at the moment. And we're going to say that those certain areas are saturated with gambling premises and that they're leading to all sorts of issues with, with vulnerable people and with crime and disorder, etc. There's also a suggestion that the terminal hour for adult gaming centres and for bingo premises is reduced to 10 o'clock in the evening. It's currently 11 o'clock. And then there's a suggestion that door supervisors must be used from 10 o'clock in the evening onwards in any gambling premises. So this would apply to gambling premises that, that already have licenses. We would say going forward, if they are operating later on, they need to have those door supervisors. The police have previously made us aware of issues with lone workers in the borough. Sometimes when people are working in adult gaming centres, there's high evidence of people being assaulted or whatever, or struggling to deal with problematic customers when they're by themselves. So we would try to avoid that, or at least try to assist those individuals by having door supervisors with them. And then finally, we would have a continuation of the borough's current no casino resolution. So just in terms of licensing and enforcement, this side of the service has been incredibly busy again this year. And as I mentioned earlier on, we have had challenges with recruitment into the enforcement officer position. We've had somebody who arrived and then left shortly afterwards. But you'll see from the slide that we've given advice on enforcement issues, 854 on 854 occasions last year. And this includes advice to residents where they may be disturbed by licensed premises, or advice to businesses themselves. We always try to engage with businesses, especially now, we're very business focused. We've got, as you know, we've got a very business friendly licensing policy as well. So where there's a misunderstanding and where there's a complaint in the first instance, we'll always go to the business and we'll try to work it through with them. We'll talk through their license and we'll tell them what they need to do. And we'll do that on a couple of occasions, and only as the last resort would we take enforcement action. So we're really genuinely focused on helping businesses as much as we can. So as you can see from the slide, we dealt with 423 complaints. That is down from last year. So that's on average approximately 8 complaints a week. And to give you an idea, really, many of these complaints can be quite complex and would ordinarily require a site visit or the review of CCTV footage. But all of them need a final response to the complainant explaining what steps we have taken. And this has previously been a huge challenge for one full-time enforcement officer, hence why we need the extra officer to help us out with this. So I know, just so you know as well, that and I'm sure you're aware from previous annual committees as well, licensing officers don't just do the enforcement, the day-to-day enforcement. They'll obviously attend large events as well, take place across the borough, and attend meetings as well about the organisation and give advice on licensing at those events. And then we've obviously got the inspection at our 3 football clubs as well. That is very time consuming. Thanks, Lorna. That's the next one. So that's it for obviously we've got the exempted items, but I don't know if there's any questions. I know I've sort of rattled through quite a lot of information there, and I've tried to squeeze in the information about the nighttime strategy and the renewal of the gambling policy. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got for Lorna or I or for Neil as well. No problem.
Thank you so much, Adrian. May I ask committee members to ask questions in turn?
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, thank you very much. And would you thank your team for all their support and not only the work you do here, but also on hearings as well, which can really be a marathon and quite an arduous task. And that doesn't go unnoticed. And I'm very grateful for your help there. Just if I may, sort of, I think I'm the main Fulham councillor here. So just around the sort of Fulham Broadway or the town centre of Fulham, and I'll probably be going back a bit in history, so you have to excuse me. But I just listed at Fulham Broadway, we used to have the Trafalgar, the George, the Redback, where it used to be the Red Lion, the King's Arms, which is now the Broadway Grill, Lloyd's Bar. There were two pubs on the, which I couldn't remember the names, on the corner of the town hall, facing in towards the Broadway. The Hibernian and McGettigans, and that's without going to, that's just on the main drag. And currently there isn't anything. I think there's a temporary hiccup in one particular area, and there's also a potential large operator, I think, who's expressed an interest in opening a pub in the area. But it's really killing. It's killing the area. We have lots of people in social housing and in even not in social housing, in very small flats, and when they want to meet up with friends or whatever else, then the pub is it's the place to go. There are some nice bars and sort of bar restaurants, but it's really the pubs that we're missing. What can we do to encourage that? And I also note that most of these pubs, when they're open, they do have later hour licenses, but they're very reluctant to use them. Is there any particular reason for that?
I mean, I think the nighttime strategy will really help to, encourage other operators to the borough. I think, giving those venues information on footfall, for example, to let them know that actually there are still a lot of people in the borough when they close, because I think that's, like you said, the issue that where they've got a license to a certain time, but it's just not economically viable for them to open to those times because they don't think it's economically viable. But I think if we, through the work that our consultants are helping us with, if we can show them that there are still people in the borough and we can drive people into the borough, then hopefully it will be worthwhile them opening later in future. But our licensing policy, I would say, is one of the most business-friendly licensing policies that I've read. And when we did research for the licensing policy in 2022, we looked at a lot of other boroughs. I think we're one of the only London boroughs that doesn't have cumulative impact zones for licensed premises. So yeah, I mean, we still offer pre-application advice, and we offer free pre-application advice for smaller businesses as well. So yeah, we're trying to encourage those venues as much as we can.
Thank you very much. And if I could just ask a completely different question. Over the last sort of year or two, we've seen a huge increase in applications for alcohol licenses from people who've got storage units the size of a telephone box. And I just don't understand. In one, we had residents actually complain about it, and we were able to get a bit of an idea and talk to the people. But I was left absolutely without a clue as to what their business model is and what it is they're doing, and whether that's a good thing or whether it's a bad thing. Or and I just wonder if you've been able to do any research on that as yet.
Well, it's definitely something we've seen an increase in, I think, since COVID. And I think, lots of people set up these businesses to deliver alcohol to people. And then since that's happened, it's just, they're obviously making money out of that. It's not something that it is a lawful process. It's a lawful business, but I totally understand how that can be disruptive for residents, especially if deliveries are taking place later on in the evening. I mean, as you know from being on the committee, if there is a license in a residential area, that will be looked at very closely, and there are conditions that could be added in terms of the use of electric vehicles and that type of thing. And I think sometimes we might need to look at it from a planning point of view as well, and see whether those, that they can operate in that way. And I know planning colleagues look at all of our applications anyway, but maybe it's something we can discuss with more widely with planning as well.
Thank you. That's very encouraging.
Thank you, Adrian, with your comprehensive overview and report this evening. And you're doing the great work with the limited resources. My question is regarding to the high street. If you can see, I know you mentioned there is a traffic flow issue, and but there's a lot of shops in the high streets are empty at the moment, and the businesses are complaining. Is there any way or any policy we can establish or do more engagement with the businesses? These shops can open back, and the pubs especially the King Street. You can see the other half of the King Street. There's a lot of shops, more than 10 shops are empty at the moment. And all the businesses, they are complaining to each other. I personally know the area very well as a councillor previous term, and they know them personally. They are keep on saying, they're asking me the leader's email address to send the complaints. So what do you suggest in this regard?
Well, it's a tricky one. I mean, we can only, we can help to a limited extent when a premises is licensed, but obviously lots of these other premises and, vacant units may not want a license or may not need a license, for any licensable activities. So where that's the case, unfortunately, we can't really help them, with our policies, etc. But I would just go back to what I, said previously about our pre-application advice, and the fact that we would offer that free advice for any independent businesses. And, we've done that in the past. I mean, I think one of the issues we might have is if we were to, for example, send out a letter or some sort of, communication to all premises and say, we can give you that free pre-application advice, is we could get certain types of licensed premises. Like say, for example, in Shepherd's Bush, there's lots of late night refreshment premises selling chicken and what have you later on into the evening. And, we can't, if we extend that offer, we don't know what applications we're going to get back. So we could get lots of other people who open businesses of that type as well. So it really is just about people just taking that leap of faith and investing in the borough. But we work very closely with colleagues in economy, and business engagement and whatever. And so and where they say to us, oh, look, this person's trying to open something here and they might want some licensable activities, we'll be straight onto that. And we'll be talking to them straight away to try and help them to get that license. And when it comes to a committee, we'll make the committee members aware that that's what we've done. We've been trying to help that business as well.
Yeah, maybe the free advice surgeries will happen, if possible. And maybe to some extent. And secondly, is the HMO license is in your remit. I have some people ask me the licensing fee HMO is quite high. Is the higher than other boroughs, or we have the higher licensing fee? The HMO licensing fees?
That's not something that we cover in the licensing service. It's another type of licensing, but I can certainly give you the contact details of the person who can help you with that.
Thank you. I just checked. Thanks.
No problem.
Right. Thank you, Chair. Well, I wanted to start with some of the things you said, and I think it's worth highlighting some of the things you've presented. 200 fewer complaints this year. I think that's really important to say. Way more advice being given instead of enforcement, etc. And I think what we have to recognise today is complaints warning letters decreased. It probably just shows a much more proactive attitude on our end, where we go to business, we engage with them softly before we go to reprehension or trying to avoid any drama or disaster. But 200 fewer complaints, I think, is a really important thing to highlight in this meeting. So well done for sort of pivoting the licensing regime in LBHF to that front, and we hope to, of course, see that similar trend next year. I wanted to go back to some of the things you've said. So starting with debt management, which you're talking about in your report on page 18. So again, a very welcome decrease in overall debt owed to this borough. I wanted to interrogate you to find out whether, is it a case of this debt being sort of everyday debt and you've reduced the amount, or is there still sort of legacy debt from previous years? Is that 9,001 really something you can't crack, or is it just a rollover?
There, I think you're right. I mean, just to sort of broadly, say, I mean, I think you're right. It's legacy debt really that's the issue, where you've got a premises that's no longer operating and has left, and then they've accumulated that debt, and then really we need somebody to take over that premises, and then on that occasion we would ask them if they could pay off the debt to make sure that the license is revived, so to speak. But we can't. The issue with the Licensing Act is that we can't revoke a license because somebody hasn't paid the fee. All we can do is suspend the license, so the license remains there but is just pending, basically. So then we do end up with a strange situation. But we do, our enforcement officers, one of their responsibilities is to go around and to speak to premises as well about any outstanding debt, which is why that we managed to keep it to, I think, quite a reasonable level for nearly 1,000 licensed premises.
So one of the things that we hear on other committees is the relationship between how much money we invest and how much we recuperate when it's, for instance, fraud or like you debt. If there is only £9,000 left, you've pretty much gone as far as you could. And if you say that that's now licenses that are suspended, what's next in debt recovery then?
Well, I mean, again, we could appoint a debt recovery agency to retrieve that money, but we are trying to be mindful of businesses and how they're struggling at the moment. So we've taken the view, I suppose, at the moment that is quite a low amount of money in the overall scheme of things as well. I appreciate it's still the public's money, but if we can live with that amount of debt, and then we can try and help businesses when they open and just try and assist them as much as we can, really.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I also wanted to talk to you about the 7 recommendations you said. And in full disclosure, you've got both the chair of the audit committee and a member of the audit committee on this panel. So I should probably know that, but I don't. So if you could remind us what were the 7 recommendations that were made
in the audit report.
In the audit report.
Yeah.
Please.
So if you can bear with me, I'll try and get that. It is one of the tabs I had open. So if it's okay with you, I'll just sort of summarize them as well. I mean, I can send around something later on, but the first observation was about our procedures and policies, in the fact that when they looked through them, they weren't clear and understandable, and that I think they said that one of our internal procedures looked like it was still being updated, and that we needed to make sure that there was a locked down final version for each one of our procedures, which we were able to do that immediately, and that's something that we did straight away. So that was the first one. So in terms of the second one was about timescales for licenses, and about any licenses being granted within 40 days. And it was identified that I think initially they said on 3 occasions that we'd granted a license outside of those times. We then interrogated the data and we went back to them and we said, actually, look, there was 1 occasion when that happened, and they were happy with that. But we obviously apologised. There was 1 occasion when that didn't happen. There was a misunderstanding with the officer and the caseload that was dealt with. And obviously on that occasion, it was unfortunate that it was outside of the 40 days. But that's something that we look at carefully now, and we have a report that we run to make sure that we don't miss any licenses and they don't go off the end of the 40-day time. And then there was something about our webpage as well, just being able to, for members of the public to be able to find applications and to be able to understand when the last day of objection is and how to make any comments, etc. So what we're going to, I mean, we made the auditors aware that there's, you can find that information online. It was just more difficult to find. So we're looking to try and see if we can improve that, find a possible IT solution to make that easier and a bit easier to navigate, really. And then there was an issue with about daily reconciliations on payments. And we were told that the licensing team should document the daily reconciliations to evidence all of those reconciliations, which we're doing. And we hadn't done that in the past. We weren't aware that we needed to do that. And that's something that we're now doing going forward. And as I said, that was a really quick win. That's something that we did straight away. And then the inspection schedules that I spoke about earlier on in relation to enforcement officers. So they spoke about the number of high risk inspections that were being carried out, and saying how that had fallen down, and generally the number of inspections that have been carried out. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. And we've set officers, enforcement officers, so unfortunately there's one officer at the moment, has a certain number of visits that we'd like them to do every week. And then we're trying to get an enforcement officer on board at the moment. And we were speaking to finance colleagues the other week to try and see if we can get somebody in on an interim basis to try and help us out and increase those enforcement numbers. And then finally, there was an issue when looking at a previous annual committee report, and I think some of the information in there, some of the percentages didn't reflect the figures when you looked at those percentages. So that's something that we've looked at very closely, and we went through the most recent report with a very fine tooth comb to try and just check that everything was as it should be, and that was all 6 of them.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Another question, if I may. We've got the expenditure amount for this year, 2023, 2024. We don't have it for the previous year. I don't know if that's something that you could find whilst I allow you time to find it. To tell you this is because I want to understand. We've had more applications, but I want to understand, roughly the cost per application, whether that's gone up or down. And another observation to my colleagues, rather than a question, also as a fellow Fulham councillor, is more to say something that we have seen in this year that I haven't always been a fan of, were very last minute, rather quite large additions to the packs, that it's quite difficult to read when you have to do your day job, for a hearing that for us councillors starts really at 5:30, because then this is where we get briefed and prepared, and we can ask questions of our legal experts. It hasn't always been, comfortable for me going to committees, knowing that I haven't been able to scrutinise properly the contents of the committee reports. So I don't know, not really a question to you, because you can say, well, do what you want, but to the committee and fellow members, that's really something that I wish we could stop.
It's very difficult, and we do, we try to speak to applicants and we ask them to provide all the information and objectors in a timely manner, and we'll say, can you provide it by this particular time? Unfortunately, the Act itself doesn't prohibit anybody from providing information much later, and what we found in so many circumstances is the applicant will provide some information, and then it sets off other people then responding to that, and I mean, I'd like to say to you there's a solution and it won't happen again, but it's very frustrating. And I know, Lorna will say sorry, Lorna, go on.
I'd just add that obviously we do say in the letters that go out to send it at least 48 hours before, and something that I am being more proactive with is setting a deadline of when, because obviously there is certain areas of the borough where there's a lot of representations received from similar people every time, so trying to set a bit more firmer deadlines. Obviously we do have to accept it, but I am trying to be more proactive because it's a lot of work, not just for us, not just for you to read, for Charles at committee services, for everyone to digest that information. So yeah, I'm trying to set internal deadlines and put them in as early as possible. It is in the guidance that goes out to send it 48 hours before, but we can't we've got to accept it when it comes in. But I am trying to be more proactive. And like I said, even with before things get to committees, trying to mediate so that things are maybe in the agenda pack rather than it be supplementary agenda as well. So that I am very proactive in dealing with the applications that come in. So I try and mitigate as much extra information as possible.
And on the, yeah.
I think I might have just got it. So I think for 23, hang on a minute, sorry, 22-23, I got expenditure as 869,000. Whereas for this year, I've got it as 540,000. So it was much less expenditure this financial year than there was the previous financial year, quite dramatically. And I think, I mean, without sort of really going into the details, I'm almost certain that would be due to external legal costs, where we were defending a very costly review for a premises. I probably won't mention now, but yeah, that we've been dealing with and is actually still ongoing as well.
Great, thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lorna, just following up on the wording to those making representations, can I check what wording you're using to when you're putting it out that 48 hours is the deadline?
I just say 48 hours that it may not be considered. There's not, I can't say it won't be considered, but I've got to word it in a way that obviously it could get adjourned, the hearing, so it may not get considered in time.
I'm just wondering, is there a way to more strongly word saying that it is strongly encouraged by the committee that all representations be submitted at a minimum of 48 hours before the committee, just to kind of reflect that and I would say it's a general consensus that it is a very frustrating aspect for both yourselves as officers, but as for us as members of the committee, that when these tit for tat representations start coming in on the afternoon of the committee itself, that this is thoroughly disliked. Yes, it is permitted under the Licensing Act. However, it is very much counterproductive and is to be strongly discouraged. I'm wondering, is there a way to, obviously being respective of the act, but being stronger in the language?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can definitely make the language more robust, and you know, and we can maybe speak to our legal colleagues to see exactly how far we can go with that, because I am conscious, as I said, that within the act itself, there's nothing, it's silent on that point. So, but I think we could have that conversation with legal and say, look, we want to make this as hard as it is, you know, and really make clear how disruptive it is when we get this information. So that's something we can certainly take away.
Excellent, that's really good to hear. My next thing is for yourself, Adrian. Also, you was talking about the issues with recruitment, and if I'm right, there's only one enforcement officer at present. In terms of when an enforcement officer, obviously currently acting alone, is entering into a premises, what kind of security measures are we building around that officer for their protection? If you could elaborate on that.
No, definitely. I mean, as part of their risk assessment, actually, that officer is not able to work alone and visit a licensed premises later on in the evening. So all those visits are carried out during the day. And if they do carry out evening visits, that's with a law enforcement officer or with a police officer. So we'll make sure that there's always two people doing that. And that's really it. We don't, officers don't wear, you know, body armor or anything like that. They don't, I mean, they would always have their phone on them, and they'd always make me or someone else in the team aware of what premises they're going to and what time they expect to be back. So there's some measures that we've had for years, and they you know, touch wood, everything's been fine with those measures at the moment. But certainly when we get the second officer, we would allow both of them to go out and do later visits. If we have a system on our database, and it alerts us if other council workers have been into a premises and they've been threatened or intimidated. It will raise that as an alert, so we'll know not to go into that premises or to only go in with the police, for example. So we'll always be mindful of that as well before we set off and carry out visits.
That's encouraging to hear, obviously, that there is that precautions.
Yeah.
Obviously, with having two officers, obviously, we may revert back with people on leave, illness, and so on. You mentioned obviously there's no body armor being worn. Is there anything like body cameras being worn or anything of that regard to obviously make a record on, protect them in the event of either verbal or physical abuse being thrown their way?
There isn't at the moment. No, that's not something that we felt is necessary. No, I mean, and equally, officers when they go into venues, especially later on, they are plain clothes as well. We found sometimes we have had operations on occasions, and we've had something that identifies you as from the licensing team. And sometimes you can find that that creates more of an issue when you've got customers who've maybe had, quite a lot to drink or what have you. So we find that it's better to be plain clothes, go into the venue, ask for the manager and ask them if they could come outside for a chat, and then you can speak to them. And if there's any, we always say to any of our officers, if there's any sort of conflict or if you don't feel right about a situation, just leave it and, and come back, and you can send an email afterwards. And if you have to lie, or if you have to do something to get away from that situation, that officer's situation is paramount. So yeah, we always make that clear.
That's really good to hear. My final question is just following up on a comment earlier about the debts, and that it being kind of a legacy debt that can be kind of transferred. Does it stay in perpetuity, or is there a point at which it gets essentially written off as a bad debt?
No, it will do, yeah. So if we look at debts that have got on for, say, 4 years or so, then we will look at writing off that debt. But it's really on a case-by-case basis, because everyone has a different fee that they pay for that premises, depending on the rateable value. So we do look at that on a case-by-case basis, but we don't like to write off debt lightly. We want to try and see if we can recover that, and if another business comes in, then there's an opportunity that we might be able to recover that debt, or we'll do as much as we can to try and recover that debt from the person who's left as well. So we'll look at multiple different angles really on it.
Obviously, for a business coming in, discovering that there's a debt left over from a previous business is not necessarily encouraging for the regeneration of commercial premises, which is obviously, the high street in general is struggling for the last number of years. Can I check, is there a duty of candor from the sellers to prospective businesses to say, look, if you're coming into this premises, be aware that this debt exists? Or is this more of a case of after a business has come in, they discover actually you are 2 or 3 grand in debt to the local council?
I think, to be honest with you, it depends on the lawyer who's dealt with that transaction and whether they've asked that question in their legal pack as to say, is there an outstanding debt on any license at the premises? And I think if that question hasn't been asked, then I think from memory, we have had occasion where people have taken over a venue and then realised that there is a debt associated with that. I mean, all I would say is that people don't, if the debt is such that they think, well, I'm not going to pay that debt, they can apply for a new license. You can have 2 licenses on the same premises. So the only reason that somebody might decide to pay a debt that's reasonably high is because that license comes with certain hours that might be attractive. So then they might say, well, actually, I'm going to pay a few years continuation fee because that means that I can transfer a license I've got till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. Whereas if I have to apply for a new license, I'm obviously going to have to go through the process, and there may be objections. So it really depends.
Do you know how many of the licenses that obviously have the 9,000 collected debt have been essentially duplicated with a new license? My reason for asking is just to understand, is it worth pursuing this debt if those premises have gone and obtained new licenses, and essentially that dormant license will, for want of a better expression, never be resurrected?
I don't think, I mean, just off the top of my head, I can't think of many occasions where that's happened. And there's that, I mean, it's just normally where somebody will, at that moment in time, make a decision, am I going to apply for a new license, or I'm going to pay off the debt? So it's, I mean, I can get you some more information on that, but I wouldn't know exact numbers at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
No problem.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Adrian, with your limited resources, how we can improve the licensing new applications and renewal applications process with the new guidance, or just for example, to giving the what sort of evidence should be, and how they can submit, how they can do more electronically, and it will be good for the committee and it will be good for you to less burden to make it more regulated. Is there any way or any suggestions do you have to make it more friendly?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I've got some suggestions, but that's more of a sort, from central government level. I mean, I think there's things like the need to advertise an application in a local newspaper. It can just got, it's got hugely expensive. And I think you're looking at sort of £500, £600 now for a business, which is more than the fee that they pay to the council. But because they have to do it, I mean, my understanding is that the local papers understand that, and also it's a big income stream for the local newspaper as well. But that's a requirement that businesses sometimes find difficult to comply with. You need to make sure that you're when you submit your application to the council, that it ties in with the notice that you've got in your window, and that you tell the newspaper at the right time. So all of that type of thing can be quite confusing and difficult. And if they get it wrong, then they're going to have to start the process again. So things like that, I mean, that could be simplified. But we really do walk through with applicants, hold their hand when they're going through an application, and we'll help them, every step of the way. And the only thing we can't do is, as I said, if they do get something wrong, we will have to say to them, I'm sorry, we're going to have to extend the consultation period. But I mean, we often have applications that keep coming back to us where we're just giving advice and guidance to, try and help them to be compliant. So
is there any other part of the country where they have the more flexible or easy steps of getting the license or renewal of application?
Not that I know of. I mean,
if you know that.
Yeah, no, I can't. I mean, the Licensing Act is obviously national legislation, and it's quite prescriptive. There's regulations, there's guidance within it, and it goes into almost granular detail about how to make an application and when you make. So everybody's stuck with it, so to speak. I think across the country, I think it just depends how engaging the individual licensing authority is, and how much help they're willing to give, how much help they're willing to give businesses. And I think, I mean, just talking to other local authorities, at conferences and various things, I think we do go above and beyond to help businesses, because I know lots of, and I don't want to say the names of the authorities, but other authorities who have maybe got more licensed premises than us will just send back applications and say it's invalid, and won't pick up the phone to somebody and say, well, if you did this or that. So I think, I know I would say this, but I think we're doing the best that we can with the situation at the moment with the legislation that we're dealing with, really.
Thank you for the clarification. You're doing the great job with the limited resources. For the clarification of the listeners online.
That's very kind. I'll pass it back to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions. The first one, which I'm sure is quite an easy answer. 11% increase in tens. Is that just to do with the Euros and Olympics and that sort of thing, or is it a lack of, should we say, late night licenses? I know you're looking at the late, and I'll come on to the late night economy side in a minute.
I think it might. I mean, this is just my opinion. I don't know this for certain, but I think it might be a shift in, where premises were traditionally open on a Friday and Saturday night. They're now seeing events that are advertised online, for example, and they're suddenly getting lots of people who come to their licensed premises on a particular occasion. So then they need their temporary event notice. Whereas what you're not getting is pubs and bars being busy just because it's a Friday or Saturday night. So it's more, about being driven by the internet as well. And I think that's why people are just having these temporary events, and that's why we're seeing an increase in it as well.
Yeah, and so it would be things like particular sporting events, etc.
Sporting event, yeah.
Okay, that's fairly easy. I'd also like to just echo colleagues' comments about the late submissions and lengthy submissions you get late, but not just that. very often it's bitty. You get the main agenda, then you get Appendix A, then you get Appendix B, and up to about Appendix 7, and trying to collate the whole lot in one go is actually quite difficult. So if at some stage there's, a single pack, or, with appendices, because some of them are exempt because they've got people's names and addresses, not addresses, but their names in there as well. So obviously taking that into account, it would be helpful. The next thing I wanted to talk about is things like the gaming centres, which is obviously an issue. You've identified that as a point, and something about non-proliferation. What work is being done with the planning department in terms of that? Obviously, there's a number of them already in place, but in terms of granting them planning permission, and within our policy, within the because they're looking at developing the new or reviewing the plan.
Well, definitely. I mean, Neil may want to say more on it, but I funnily enough, I had a meeting with some planning colleagues this morning, actually, and I was talking about the evidence base that we're gathering for the licensing, for the gambling policy. And once that's complete, they will be very interested in seeing that evidence as well, because obviously that would align with any planning policies as well. So yeah, we're definitely working side by side on that as well. But I don't know whether you say anything else, Neil.
Thank you, yes, Chair. Yes, I mean, I think it's quite important talking about the nighttime strategy as well. Now we have the link between licensing and planning. We can certainly look at that more seriously, and the nighttime strategy, understanding how the town centres are working, and that includes the gambling as well. We can feed that into planning policies in the future. A lot of the time you're dealing with historic planning permissions on premises.
Yeah, no,
there's nothing we can do about them, unfortunately. And I think Adrian mentioned before, there is the possibility that gambling is going a bit more online anyway, so we have one less premises. So I think the nighttime strategy is more about, well, what are we going to do with these premises? First of all, the empty ones at the moment, how are we going to make these town centres work? So it's a much bigger question since I've got involved in the licensing about, how do we deal with licensing aspects? Is how does that feed into policies? Cultural policies, industrial policies, all the planning policies. So it's a much bigger question being asked, and we've had planning policy colleagues walking around the night tours, for instance, in the town centres, and we've been having some really good discussions about what do you do about this. So it's not something that's going to be fixed quickly. It's something that's going to have to feed into policies over the next 5-10 years. But the town centres are not going to be fixed immediately. We can try and do some very quick fixes, and we'll certainly be looking to do that. But it's going to take a lot longer in terms of building that into the policies and how do you strengthen those economies throughout the next 5-10 years.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've had a number of residents query the number of gaming venues along King Street, for instance, and elsewhere, or the number of bookies that you get in one particular street. And while obviously I take your point about the historic ones, which we can do nothing about, moving forward, and given that the time is ripe, given that the Hammersmith and Fulham plan is in the process of being redeveloped and reviewed, it's time to make sure that is in. On the similar sort of subject about working with other departments, and this links again into the nighttime economy. And just the other night, we did a premises in Uxbridge Road, and there's a number of issues that only too well that there are about taxi, just goodness knows what else, and drivers and so on. What is being done? Because obviously, if we're trying to boost the nighttime economy, rather than just say, sorry, 11 o'clock's the cutoff time, which would go against that particular policy. How can we extend the nighttime economy without falling foul of all the residents who are saying, hold on, there's all these other problems here. So what work is being done with the other departments to try and resolve that, to permit the nighttime economy moving forward?
So I think, yeah, I mean,
if that makes sense what I'm saying.
No, it does. I know, and that was part of when we developed the nighttime strategy. We initially spoke with stakeholders, with other departments, and we spoke to them about being, wanting businesses to open later, but being sympathetic to residents and realising that late night venues weren't suitable in all areas and on all occasions. So but I think working, in terms of when you mentioned, I think you mentioned about Uber taxis and things like that. Is that what you were mentioning about So for example, colleagues in highways are aware of the, the nighttime strategy and, have inputted into it as well with their concerns about that. And, potentially we could have areas where we would say it's not suitable for people to use the pavement area outside of premises. And I think it's just a case of, a case by case basis and looking at each individual premises and seeing, is this suitable, to open later on in the evening? And then also working with, obviously very closely with, planning colleagues. That helps massively now. We're part of that wider team.
I appreciate, some of this is obviously going to be political. I'm not going to ask you to comment on that, but obviously comms is going to be a major issue as well, isn't it? Because
Yes,
trying to get across why the planning, why the licensing policy is changing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's something that we did want to get out earlier on, actually, and there's going to be a web page that's going to come out shortly that's going to have links to a survey, and then that explains the idea behind the nighttime strategy and why we want to do it, and the fact that we're being sympathetic to residents, and I think the other thing is that it's not just licensed premises as well. So we're really looking at other businesses. So maybe even like, a doctor's surgery or a laundrette, for example, might want to open later on if we provide them with the information that there's footfall later on in the evening. Because I think if more of those premises are open, it creates a safer environment because there's just more people around. So it's not, although, the licensing team with Neil as well, been leading on the nighttime strategy, I would be reluctant to say it's just purely about licensed premises. It's about businesses operating generally later into the early evening, not necessarily into the early hours of the next day either.
Do you have any sort of feeling or intel about why those premises that do open late haven't generated the same effect with others? For instance, there's Wetherspoons is open till whatever time it is, midnight or on regular. And is it the Swan that's open till? Is it the Swan? I think it is. It's opened quite late as well.
Yeah.
So there are premises around that are open late, but none of the others seem to have followed suit. So you can go across the road over there, and that still shuts at 11 or even 10:30 or early on occasions.
I don't know. All I've been hearing from the trade is that their customer base is quite transient, and it can be that lots of people come to their venue on one particular night, as I said, because there's an occasion or something's happening, somebody's birthday, or there's a particular band, for example, if there's music there that's playing, but you don't get what you used to get years ago, where people will go to the same pub on the Friday or Saturday night, and especially now people work from home. I know, talking to stall holders in Lyric Square, were saying that now it's particularly quiet on Mondays and Fridays, where people work from home on those days. And I think that then has a knock-on effect to the licensed businesses as well, where people aren't going, for a pint after work on a Friday as much as they may be used to. So there's lots of different factors. Hopefully our consultants will, understand a bit more about that as well, and we'll have some more information on that.
I think you have always covered my questions as well. So following up to what Councillor Wesley Scott said about nighttime, how do we compare with other boroughs in terms of the nighttime economy?
Well, I mean, I know obviously, you've got boroughs like Westminster Council that I think are just, they sort of, I think it's fair to say they would lead in terms of the nighttime economy, in terms of that offer. And that's one of the things that our consultants identified, that a lot of people are maybe coming out of Hammersmith and going to the Apollo, or, for example, and then they're going on the tube and they're going to Soho afterwards. Why aren't they staying in? Well, I think, it's because of the offer, that they're not staying in Hammersmith at the moment, or in any of the other town centres. So yeah, I think Westminster is particularly a big draw. But I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, about the offer in the other boroughs. Well, I don't know enough about it anyway to give you some advice on that. But I know other boroughs are producing nighttime strategies as well. And I know Wandsworth have just completed theirs. And I know that Kensington and Chelsea, I think, are in the final stages of completing theirs as well. So it's something that a lot of boroughs are trying to do, and Westminster did theirs a couple of years ago. But it seems like Westminster is really sort of sucks in people, you know, now with the really good transport links, and they're leaving the other sort of individual town centres, unfortunately.
That myself. In terms of that night time economy for Shepherd's Bush, have you been able to talk to the other businesses like Bush Theatre and all that to see what they like to see as well? Have we?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've been to some. I've presented the initial findings to the enterprise board earlier on last week about that, and previously when we started the nighttime strategy, we went to that board as well and gave them, you know, an outline of what it was that we wanted the strategy to do, and then got their feedback as well, and they gave us lots of really good feedback. And then our consultants have been in touch with, you know, the individual businesses, key stakeholders, you know, at the Westfield Centre, colleges, etc., to try and get their understanding of what they would want from a nighttime strategy. So yeah, that's been one of the key things that we've done as well. Yeah.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, Adrian.
No problem at all.
Okay. We now need to agree the report's recommendation. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Then we go to item 6. Item 6. Okay, the member of license committee notes the contents of this report and provide any comments, suggestion, or recommendation for the team. So if we have any more recommendation, please send it to them. So otherwise, we go to item 6. We now any discussion on contents of exempt minutes from 12th June 2023 meeting and exempt elements for the item 5 will require the committee to pass the proposed resolution to exclude members of the public and press for the proceeding of this discussion. Do members agree the proposed resolution set out to exclude public and press from the meeting? Is
Agreed.
this agreed? Okay, end of live stream.